you wrote a book that I find fascinating and I think is really great called Black Victim to Black Victor. How is it going?
Great. I mean,
Being a
uh,
Black
I,
victor.
well, in regards to the book, I had no expectations.
You
I
self-published it, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
self-published it. I didn't have I didn't have a public presence as well, and all I wanted to do was just write a book. And obviously, I wanted people to read it, so I just tried to market it, and it just turned into something much bigger than I ever anticipated. So quite literally, I was like, as long as my friends and family buy it, and maybe 10 other people, I would have been fine. But it's been much more than that.
That's amazing. And what inspired you to write the book?
Nothing necessarily good. 2020,
Yeah.
especially the reaction to George Floyd.
Mhm.
And that was kind of that in combination with COVID. It was like the first time in my life where it felt like you weren't allowed to um, ask pertinent questions about major things that were happening in society or major narratives that were happening. So, I'm a pretty private person in general, especially back then. I didn't really use social media. I just kept all my thoughts to myself. But it's a lot different choosing to keep your thoughts to yourself and being told you have to keep your thoughts to yourself.
Right.
And that made me want to find a way to express myself. I initially started going on free speech forums, and they actually encouraged me to write more. And like a year prior, I had an idea of writing a book as like a legacy thing for my son, but I just didn't know what to write about. And it just kind of all came together. It took me about 9 months from start
Mhm.
to finish. I actually rewrote much of the book about 3 or 4 months in because my writing style improved and the tone that I wanted was actually coming through, and so I kind of had to rewrite what I originally wrote from the start. But it came out exactly how I wanted, and the tone was right. So anybody who actually reads the book, they tell me uh, it sounds like I'm being very honest and I'm putting my arm around their shoulder. Um, so it is coming from a place of love, even though I'm criticizing certain things.
And what were you criticizing? What would you say your biggest criticisms were?
Uh, well, all right. So there's parts of it where I'm criticizing, and there's parts of it that I'm highlighting something in a different way that we kind of just gloss over.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest part is talking about the importance of family. And
Mhm.
sometimes there's a reflexive thing where it's like, the black nuclear family is broken, and people like to go to LBJ for everything, but they talk about it and they just kind of gloss over it and they just kind of keep it moving. And so I wanted to use my story growing up without my father, how it impacted me, and tried to explain like how it impacts so many other young black boys. But in reality, it's actually a much bigger issue because it's nothing unique to black kids
Yeah.
who want their fathers. Like all kids want their fathers. All kids
Mhm.
want a strong, sound nuclear family. They want to know who their parents are. They want some structure, things like that. And that's a major issue that's happening in America. Nearly a quarter of children are growing up in separate homes from their parents. So, it's a much bigger issue than the Black community. But I was making it about the Black community within the book to make a point, and to put a face to it rather than just saying, Black people need to get married and raise their kids and just kind of move on to the next thing. I'm a real person. I have a real story, and I go into some detail as far as my relationship with my father or the lack thereof.
Mhm. Where was your father?
Not with us.
Mhm.
He was basically. We moved around a lot,
Yeah.
so I've lived in 4 states before the age of 18,
Wow. Like
um,
me.
and yeah. So my father was always in Detroit. Um, he's immigrant to the country. Actually, he's from Trinidad,
Mhm.
um, and then eventually met my mom, and then we were born here. But um, my father was always in Detroit. He always had a wife, which was obviously not my mother. So we were the other kids. Um, you know, and he has his own family, which I don't really know much of. I believe I have maybe a sister of some sort. I have no idea. Just completely disconnected from that side of the family. I met his mother once, along with my cousins, all at the same time. So they know we exist, but there's just zero relationship between us. Um, but yeah, he's basically always been over there. He would very randomly and seldomly come and see us. Especially when we started living in the Northeast and New York and New Jersey. He would stop by once in a while because he would go to New York City to get fabric because he was a tailor.
Mhm.
But outside of that, I didn't really have a relationship with him. He rarely called. And when he did, it was very awkward conversations. And and honestly, when I did speak to him on the phone, it was because my mother put us on the phone.
Who were your male role models growing up? Did you have any?
Honestly, I didn't.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't really have any male role models in person or even just like figurative role models. My mother never got married. She didn't really have any, I don't even want to say serious relationships. She barely had any relationships. So it was basically, myself, my mother, and my sister, um, and, moving around the country a little bit and her just taking care of us. So,
Mhm.
I remember when my exposure to other men and boys was hit and miss. My mother did try to have me in like baseball, little league baseball when I was younger. She had me in Cub Scouts all the way to Boy Scouts. So I was around it, but not enough where it was like a major impact. Um, and for quite some time, I always felt uncomfortable around men because I always felt like an inadequate man.
Mm.
Like I don't know all these things because I didn't grow up around guys like that. Not in the same way. Obviously, you're in school and you interact sort of, but not on at a deep personal level. I never had that real like a male figure who's an adult to kind of mentor me. So I always, missed out on that. So there's a lot that I had to learn, especially the past 10, 15 years.
What are the things that men who don't grow up with fathers, because obviously I'm not male and I wouldn't really know I know not having my parents got divorced, so I didn't have him around after a certain age, and I know how that affects women. But how does it affect a man growing up without your dad around?
Uh, for one, temperament.
Mm.
The way I kind of describe young men is that they're like a they're like a chaotic ball of energy, and you have to train them how to control it. Because if you don't, they can be extremely dangerous, like
Mhm.
physically dangerous. So when you're a child and you have a man who can recognize like, no, you need to handle yourself this particular way, and it sounds different and sounds controversial, but it sounds different coming from a male figure than it does from a female figure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And because he can understand and he can speak to you in a particular tone, and we respond differently depending on the person that it's coming from, and that matters a lot when it's coming from your father, especially a father that you respect, versus your mother, even if you respect her as well. It's just different. And so, I learned a lot, especially because when you're growing up in that environment, you don't realize what you're missing. But I realized what I was missing by being involved in my son's life and saw what he had at a young age that I didn't have.
Right.
Um, and that was one of those things. My son is I'm calm. People meet me and they're like, "You're really calm." My son is calmer than I
Yeah.
am. Right. So, we making sure that he controlled his emotions. I remember specifically, I introduced areas of disappointment for him because I realized at a very early age when something wasn't working out his way, he pouted too much.
Yep.
So I just started telling him no to stuff that I could easily tell him yes to and watching him be okay with it.
Yep.
And then over a period of time, I'd just be like, something simple. Could I have some cookies? I was like, no. He was like, okay. And it just, he was fine with it. And then maybe 5 minutes later, I was like, go ahead and have the cookies because you handled that well.
Yeah.
Right. It's that kind of thing. I'm trying to shape and form how he responds to the world, because now that he's 18 and he's in the workplace and he has to deal with different types of personalities, he has to be able to handle his emotions,
Mhm.
disappointment,
Mhm.
being upset. Maybe a girl hurts him. Like, how is he going to handle all this? And so he has to be able to control his emotions. So when you see like crime, when you see violence, you see all these particular things. These are, in many ways, untrained men.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's just like how you would see a rabid dog on the street, they're untrained as well. They never had that instruction and they just respond. So that is why they're quick for violence, quick to react in a particular way, hyper emotional, right? Because no one ever trained them to be mindful of the amount of power that they have and how to regulate their emotions.
Have you seen a lot of this literature coming out now that really points to what you were writing about in this book, the two-parent advantage? That even that there's that is the biggest advantage you can give a kid, even beyond class. If you have a rich parent, if you come from wealth and your parents are separated, the outcomes are still slightly better, are better even if you came from means that were less with two parents.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I can't remember which study it was, but I've heard the same thing. It's a major impact, because even if you have money, like there are people with money who've destroyed their lives,
Oh, they're so messed
right?
up. I grew up around rich kids who had like, they name their kids after their nannies and like they're a mess.
They're a complete mess,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, having money helps in life, absolutely, but that's not the end all be all.
Mhm.
Being able to have that security within yourself, having a sense of maturity, being able to regulate your emotions, having a sense of purpose, right? And I think especially for young men, your father helps to guide you to find that purpose as well.
Mhm.
um, Having someone to lean on, when times are hard, like these things are incredibly important. And I've seen it from the angle of, I didn't have those things, and I can look back and see where I struggled, and I didn't have to struggle in those ways, versus my son, who can call his father at any time and we can talk about anything he wants to talk about.
Yeah, there's this weird on the right. My friend and I were just talking about this, how uh, certain corners of the right wing are now viewing a male being competent as like a cuck. Like, oh, you can cook a dinner, you can change a diaper, you cuck. And it's like that. My husband is she's such a daddy's girl because he's so competent and he's so capable of being a provider, and not just in the way that he's a financial provider, but he's also a provider emotionally and in those ways
Mhm.
around the house that are helpful. And it's just like I find the dynamic right now between men and women and between the two parties really fascinating. And I actually think you occupy a space that is sane and common sense that more people need to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I wanted to talk to you too, because I think so much of, your book addresses a lot of the third rails that you really can't talk about. Like, it reminded me when I was reading your book of when I had my friend on, Coach T, and he came on and he said Black Lives Matter is a white cult. And we lost sponsors because a black man said Black Lives Matter is a white cult. And I was like, the irony of losing sponsors from this very kind of white coated brand because a black man spoke his mind but didn't say the thing that he was like supposed to say was
Right.
so like darkly hilarious to me.
Yeah. Well, to be specific about what you're talking about on the right, there's like there's this weird alignment with, I would say, the radical spectrum of the men's red pill space,
Mhm.
which I haven't talked too much about it because I'm trying to find some sort of way to talk about it in the right way that doesn't make everybody hyper emotional to what you say. But I'm someone who consumes red pill content. I'm a consumer of all types of content. I've watched all types of stuff. You'd be surprised at the type of things I've seen, and repeatedly consumed. So I understand the different figures within the red pill movement. I've watched all their stuff, just about all the main people that might come up. I've watched their stuff, so I know what they say. I know how they think. I know why they say what they say, and I see the holes in everything they say. Now, some
Mhm.
of them are just for entertainment, right? Just like
Yeah.
Jerry Springer is not for education, right?
Right.
You just put it on and you get dumber as you watch it, but it just makes you laugh. Um, some of the red pill content is that. Um, and I think sometimes we attempt to make that mistake of taking the Jerry Springer of red pill and making it something that it isn't. But as far as the general ideology, there are holes within it. There are grains of it that are truthful, that work, that are honest. Like, for example, much of the red pill space would say, as a man, you need to focus on yourself, build yourself up, increase your money, go to the gym, get fit. That in general, that's good advice,
Right.
right? It doesn't take a genius to come up with that,
Right.
but okay, that's that's good advice. However, when it starts getting into the details, just like how feminism has holes within
Yes.
feminism,
Mhm.
red pill has holes within the ideology itself. So, for
Mhm.
example, the biggest one, and actually, I'll give credit to Michael Knowles. Michael Knowles is the first and only person that has ever pointed out this hole, and I've been like wanting to scream it out loud publicly, but I haven't. So the red pill space will talk about how single mothers are the worst, detrimental society. Oh, single mothers are terrible. And they talk about how it impacts kids sometimes, but they say single mothers are bad. And then they say in the next sentence, don't get married.
Yeah.
Well, how do you think single mothers are created? Because obviously people are going to procreate.
Right.
So then what? So like that's the whole in the
Yeah.
entire thing. So either, and I completely understand when they say, marriage is a gamble for men. Okay, fine, it's a gamble for everybody. But we'll take that argument. So you don't tell them to avoid marriage completely because one, it's not realistic, right? People are still going to get married. It's not going to end because a couple of bros online said don't get married. So what makes more sense is to tell them, here's how you select a proper mate.
Right.
Like go down that route so you can get married. And there have been guys you would consider red pill who have advocated for marriage in a smart way, which makes sense. And that's what I would advocate for. I
Yeah.
wouldn't tell a guy to marry the only woman who you're having sex with and you're just rolling it into a relationship and then you just roll it into a marriage. Like, no, you need to have conversations. You need to make sure that you guys align ideologically as far as the family goes. Like there's so many steps that lead up to it that increase the odds of your relationship succeeding. Then you get married.
Yeah.
But they don't, these are mature conversations, but we have an immature way of talking about this particular topic. It's either men bad or men good, women bad, women good. Let's take the worst example of a woman. Let's take quite literally sex workers, bring them on a podcast and say, see, guys, this is how women work. And it's like, no, they are sex workers. Like, this is a specific population of people who think this particular way, and this is not represent, like, it's that would be like if there was a feminist podcast that brought on ex-cons
Right.
and said, see, ladies, this is how guys are. It's like, no, this isn't represent, most guys aren't ex-cons, just like
Right.
most women aren't sex workers. So like there's a level of immaturity that is happening here and no one cares because it just validates their feelings at the moment.
Yeah, and it seems like there isn't much. It's like a very nihilistic
Yeah.
view of relationships, like there's like the whole body count discussion that always drives me insane. And even if there's some truth to it, it's still like, guys, you've probably never even had sex with one woman. So like it sounds a lot like a cope to me a lot of the time. And I understand, I get it. I know that that's like a real thing for men, and I don't deny that reality. I also know that you can have a quote unquote high body count and be in a very fulfilling, loving relationship, whether you're a man or a woman. And it's like that's what we should be focusing on, not these that kind of, for all the talk about on the right, like, oh, the left's focus on identity. This is identitarian politics. You're focusing
Yeah.
on things that people are, it's not immutable for women, but it's like you're going to hold somebody, um, there's no redemption. There's no redemption in
Yeah.
either extreme form of our political discourse, whether that's social or political. And this is something that bothers me. And I think your book is one of the few kind of optimistic, hopeful lights. You've presented yourself and put your message out there as somebody who's willing to have these kind of challenging conversations and discussions, but I do get a sense of hope even just in your title and from your message. And I think it's rare because I don't know that it actually gets as much traction as all the other stuff does.
Yeah. Human beings are wired to notice the negative more than the positive.
Mhm.
We turn our head when there's a car accident. We wait for the crash. Like these are things that we look for. So it's hard fighting against that instinct to gravitate towards the negative. If Twitter was nothing but positive things, no one would be on Twitter. And that's kind of the reality. So you have to, at least in my opinion, you have to try to point out the problems, but lead towards a solution or
Right.
find some sort of hope. So you can use it to your advantage if you do it the right way. I actually want to go back a little bit on the body count thing, because I'm glad you brought that up. I think, much like you, that the body count topic is overblown. It is oversimplified because, first off, the number is an arbitrary number. Maybe for Bob, 10 partners is one too many. Maybe for John, 10 partners is perfectly fine. Like, it's arbitrary. It's an arbitrary number.
Yeah.
What really matters, what the number is supposed to signify, and to me, the only thing that matters is how promiscuous you are. Like, because that's ultimately what you're trying to figure out. And why does that matter? Obviously, for procreation reasons. But I also want to say, like, it can matter from a sense of what is fun. Because I'm just going to speak very blunt. Um, being a hoe and a player is kind of fun. Like, there's
Yeah.
fun aspects to it. You
For
go
sure.
out, it's a little bit reckless, but sometimes reckless stuff is kind of fun, and you're
Yeah,
just
of
like, oh,
course.
you build all these memories, and then you reach a certain age, and you find that guy or girl, and you just stop, right? And then life is different. It's not as fun, right? Every day is about the same, and maybe you have a week or two where something you do is fun in a different way. And so for me, what I would be concerned with is she always going to miss that fun?
Mm.
And that's kind of like the classic trope. The woman gets divorced, and what does she do? She goes back to what was fun. And what was fun was going out drinking and having random sex. And right, that was what was fun. And to me, that's kind of a red flag.
Mhm.
Like, why was that so much? Like, why was that your level of fun?
Mhm.
And that points to a level of promiscuity that probably existed prior. And sometimes people search for the thing that they weren't able to do, and they just go all into that. So it's not always that. But that, to me, that's what the number is supposed to represent. However, the number doesn't tell the whole story. And you can tell a lot about promiscuity just by asking simple questions. I don't think I've ever outright asked any woman that I've been with long term how many men she's been with.
That's like a question you ask when you're like 19. It's like I don't think I ever heard that question after I got out of my teen years.
Yeah. Like, you just wouldn't. Like, first off, if you're in your mid 30s, obviously this person is single and you're dating them, so they've probably slept with a number of people.
But the
Does it
average
matter?
woman, the numbers are actually way overblown even in this discussion. So when you like
Yeah.
Wilfred Riley always points this out. He's like, when you drill down into the actual body count numbers, the average woman, it's like 6 people. It's like they
Yeah.
make it sound like it's like in the 20s or dozens or hundreds, and it's literally like 6 people. It's not even 10.
And you know what's crazy to me? And this goes like to um someone, I can't remember who had this quote. It might have been someone in the red pill space, but I think they're right. Um, Women look to disqualify, men look to qualify,
Mm.
right? So men are like, yeah, I see this red flag. Yeah, she kind of acts this way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know what? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to just gloss over it and keep it moving. Women are like, listen, he moved and smelt a little bit. Like, no, I'm not like, I'm not messing with him. Like because you have way more options, a lot easier for you to find a guy to at least be interested in.
It's interesting though
And,
that it's not really what I've noticed of my friends, some of my
mm.
friends, like they just will skip through fields of red flags and I'll be like, "Really? We're just going to ignore this." Okay, because they're so desperate to like find a guy and be in a relationship.
Yeah,
So, I do think like even if they have more options, the market is in favor of the men in this in the battle of the sexes only because there's so many women who want a relationship and men can just kind of burn through all these women at their leisure if they're not looking for a relationship.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm more so meant because if you're coming to that point of asking all these questions, you're at a certain point within that relationship. So not like first, second date, but when you're a guy and you're like, man, I really like this girl. We've gone out, we've been messing with each other for a few months. Like you're at like a certain stage where made it, you want to turn it serious, and they just start overlooking stuff because like, man, I don't want to go back and start all over. It took
Yeah.
forever just to find one. So like I understand it to a degree. I've been that guy. But you end up overlooking a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And but the point I actually wanted to make is that you can find out how promiscuous or how sexually active a woman's been just by asking questions. Not
Yeah.
You don't have to ask direct questions. Tell me about your life. Like, and
Tell
just
me
people
about your
start
life,
talking.
ho.
Right.
Just kidding.
Like you're like, oh, you went to college? Oh, okay. And then you start having conversations about college, and then she's like, oh, you know what? Uh, you know, my girlfriend did this crazy thing and we did it, and like, all right, well, I did this as well. And they just talk, and you start realizing like, oh, okay. Like they did a lot of stuff in college. Or you're just like, oh, like my wife, for example, had basically one boyfriend throughout college.
Mhm.
That was it. And so like I didn't have to ask her how many guys you've been with. We just talked about her life, and I know how many guys she's been with,
Yeah.
and that's it. So it's the idea is just to find out how promiscuous she is, to see is it going to be an issue within your relationship if you're seeking a relationship with that person. If you're not, then it doesn't matter, right? But if you actually want something long term, you increase your odds of a better relationship by not getting with someone who has maybe a history of being promiscuous. It's not a guarantee or anything like that, but
Yeah.
that's ultimately why the number has represented that.
I think
Um,
I a lot of people though like reach the end. I can speak for myself as someone who
mhm.
has been openly promiscuous that I kind of reached the end of that too. There's
Yeah.
like my husband and I were laughing this morning because I read some line and it was like Leonardo was seen in a clubbing, and I was like, "Oh God, that sounds horrible." Like I can't imagine being in my 50s clubbing. That just sounds I'm like, this sounds depressing to me. This sounds like people might look at that and be like, "Oh, look at this badass." I'm like, "No, this is sad." He doesn't have like a daughter running in and climbing into bed and giving you hugs, and I don't know, it might seem fun, but there's a huge amount of meaning and joy and love and all of the things, purpose, when you have that relationship that you care about, and then even if you have kids. So is your wife your second wife? In your
No, first and only.
Okay, but you haven't you because in your book you were engaged.
Yes, we were engaged at the time, and now we're married.
And is this but you have an 18-year-old son?
Yes, from a previous relationship. I had
Okay,
him
sorry,
when,
I was just trying to do all the
yeah,
math. I was like,
it's
I'm
all
not
good.
following. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah. I was
Okay.
21 when he was born.
Okay, oh, wow, young.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay. So you have had a long and interesting life in this like relationship and kid department. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, so so were you present in your son's you were obviously like you said present in his life?
Mhm.
Okay. And you and the mom just weren't married. Sorry if these are too personal. If it's too
Not at all.
personal, you can say it's too
Not at
personal.
all. No, we I would say like the first year of his life, things were mostly good between myself and his mother. There was a little bit of a rocky point between uh, before he turned 2, I would say. Um, but after that, it's just one of those things where she's probably more upset than you are, and she's just angry, But
Yeah.
she found somebody else.
Yeah.
She got married. She had 2 more kids.
Nice.
And honestly, like, we both had to mature, and,
Yep.
she matured, and she's great to deal with. Ever
Yep.
since then, we co-parent, no animosity. I've never talked negatively about her.
Yep.
um, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
Especially even my son, I make sure he respects his mother.
Yep.
He does. And she, lets me know how things are going. And that was a little bit different. He's 18.
Yeah.
He's got, a foot out the door.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a great relationship between us.
And then you got remarried. And do you have more kids now?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we're trying,
Yeah.
but
But
my
you're
wife
not.
actually, my wife is older than I am.
Okay.
Um, so I'll be 40 this year. My wife is 6 years older than me.
Okay.
Um, so, it may or may not be possible.
Yeah. 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 I know that one. I know
Yeah.
that one well. That's cool. And did you guys meet just on like, how did you guys meet?
Oh, the old fashioned way, in person.
Ooh, I love these stories. Did you meet
Yeah.
cute?
Um, well, actually, we met. I'll give the quick rundown. We met through a coworker slash friend of mine. Um, it was basically his sister. Um,
Ah,
and he invited me to his house, and we were hanging out. I had met her before. She was married. This is her second marriage.
okay.
She was married at the time. I met her. Everything was fine. We didn't even really have much dialogue. Between that time and the next time we saw each other, she separated, got her own place. And so the next time I saw her, she was by herself, and it was like the first time we actually like had a conversation. Um, and she mentioned traveling. I've been doing a bunch of traveling, and she mentioned Barcelona, and I said, "Oh, I've been to Barcelona." So we just started talking, and I actually wasn't, and this is like a whole big thing, but I wasn't trying to pick up my wife. I was just trying to talk to her
Yeah.
and treat her like a human being, and we just became friends. And she wanted to travel, but she was afraid of traveling by herself as a woman. So I said, "Hey, listen, we're trying to travel around the same time. Do you want to come with me? I have friends. I'll show you around." Completely platonic, and I've actually done that before because I'd rather people travel than be afraid to travel,
Yeah.
by themselves and stay home. So I said, "Okay, let's do that." And it was like, well, if we're going to travel, let's continue to get to know each other. And we would talk almost daily because we were both single and kind of lonely. And yeah, we just developed a nice friendship. We talked basically every day for like, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks. And then finally, I said, "Hey, you want to meet up?" Sure. And we went out for sushi, and The rest is history.
And did you travel together?
Oh yeah, so traveling is like a big part of our relationship now. You know, we became official in September 2020. I'm sorry, September 2019. We became official, um,
That's when
and
my husband and I got back together.
there you go. So there's something special right
Magic
before the
year.
pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
um, yeah, we became official, and then she, we had booked a trip basically, March of 2020. Needless to say, we had
Oh
no idea
boy.
the pandemic, and we weren't able to go on that trip. We had to cancel it. But she was like, "Oh, I want to go somewhere," and I was like, "Where do you want to go?" She's like, "I just don't want to wait to this big trip." She was antsy because she had never really been out of the country, or at least to Europe. So I was like, "Pick a place." She's like, "Paris." I was like, "All right, let's go." She's like, "Are you serious?" So got cheap flights to Paris. We stayed there for 4 nights, and that was the first time I told her I loved her. And we went for her birthday in
Oh.
December. So yeah, traveling's been a huge part. Our honeymoon, we went to Turkey. Every year we've been going to basically to Europe, and eventually we'll go to other places. But we're planning a trip now in September, to go back to Turkey and to go to Germany again. Um, but so traveling is a big part of it. And also, just so you know, we got married September of 2022. So I proposed to her September of, was it? Yes, 2021. September of 2020, I proposed to her. September of 2021, we got married. And
Wow.
basically, we've been traveling every September since, going back and forth uh, internationally.
Oh wow. And where are you in the country?
New Jersey.
Okay, yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. That's such a cute love story. I love that. I just
Yeah.
think it's so I guess this is why I get so frustrated with the discourse a lot of the time, particularly like you make such a good point. It's such an immature discourse because it's like people's lives are messy. People have been through a lot. You can have the love of your life and something tragic can happen to them and then you're alone and have kids or whatever and then you can find love again and it doesn't have to be this clean like oh we meet in our and some people have that they meet in their 20s they are high school sweethearts or I mean I've heard so many different versions of this and it seems like this is part of the internet's fault. It just all gets flattened into this discourse that doesn't allow for redemption or hope or the kind of human messiness that defines a well-lived life. And
Yeah.
I do think that your book did a great job of really kind of digging into that messiness. And the reason I ask about your wife is because in the acknowledgments, she's the first person you thank. And it sounds like she was really a huge part of helping you, flesh this out and pushing you to do it and pushing you past kind of your self. I mean, I still haven't managed to wrestle a book out. So kudos to you. And I know a lot of it is just self doubt and I think I push up against a lot of self-doubt. Like, why would I write a book? What do I have to say? Who wants to hear me? All of those things that can go on. And it sounds like she was like your big cheerleader.
Yeah, very much so. One thing I haven't talked about too much, but when I met my wife, I was going through, I would say, like a political realignment, but
Mm.
like privately. Um, and I was figuring out stuff, and I was curious. Like I said, I'm a consumer of all types of content, and I was at the time consuming conservative content for the first time. I'm a former Democrat, and when I met her, one of the one of the first things I did was I was like, "Hey, check out this video," and I sent it to her. It was Larry Elder, and she was like, "I don't know what to do with this," because I would call her a default Democrat. Everybody she knows is a
Yeah.
Democrat. She was born and raised in Brooklyn, and so she's like, "I really like him, but how is this going to work?" And she liked me. She saw me past anything else, and instead of running away from it, like she just embraced it, and we just talked, and we didn't debate, we didn't do any of that stuff. and we just discuss these things. So much so that like she's not a Democrat herself anymore. I didn't convince her to do anything
Yeah.
otherwise. We just talked. Um, and so, there was that love that was there where she was willing to say, like, let me look further into this. Let me talk to him about it rather than be like, oh, he's supporting this. Oh, let me just walk away. Um, because sometimes people believe certain things because they only have certain information. They only have one perspective. She's only been surrounded by Democrats. I know what that's like,
I do too.
right? So, like, not everything is because everybody's this true diehard believer and everybody's radically this and radically that. Sometimes it's just cultural. Sometimes it's just all they grew up around. But she was extremely, extremely important for me. Not necessarily a motivating factor as far as like go out there and keep writing, because I was already motivated to do that. But every day, she would take the train into New York City. She was working in Manhattan. Every day, I would get to the office at 6 a.m. I would write for an hour, hour and a half, and I'd send her what I wrote. And she would read
Mm.
it, and she was like, wow, this is great. This is great. And so much so, towards the end, she helped me edit the book.
Wow.
So, you know, her love for me, and not even just love or respect, which is incredibly important. I don't think the Manosphere talks about that enough. Um, Her respect for me and being proud of me for accomplishing this is much like how my family, who may not even agree with what I'm saying, they are so proud of me because they love me. And like love surpasses all this other superficial nonsense. But yeah, my wife is like, what do you need done? My wife has gone to conferences with me and sold copies of my book. She's just like, let me tell you, this book is the greatest book. Like she is my biggest cheerleader. Anything I ask for, like she's like, yes, let's go ahead and do it. And that's the type of person like I wish everybody could find that type of
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, there is. Do you consider yourself conservative now?
Conservative on some things, liberal on other things.
Mhm.
I would say I'm a moderate in most of my positions. The only position that I've wholeheartedly changed, like in like a dramatic way, is the abortion topic. I am wholly pro-life. I'm like radically pro-life in my views. Whereas before I was a pro-choice Democrat, the kind of thing. But I have my we don't even necessarily have to get into all that, but I have like all these reasonings behind it.
Interesting. I wanna hear them.
Are you aware?
Yeah.
Well, um, there's no other way of really saying it. An ex-girlfriend of mine chose to kill my child, and I let it happen, and it's a regret. Like obviously I can't stop her,
Right.
but I didn't. I said the thing that they claim you're supposed to say as a good Democrat. It's your choice, right? And when you're a woman who is pregnant, and maybe you weren't expecting to be pregnant, the last thing you want to hear from a guy is "It's your choice." You want to hear, "We got this. I support you.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
do this." And I took her to get it done. It was her choice. I'm being supportive, right? That's what a good Democrat does. Um, but it never felt good, and you could see how it affected her
Mhm.
for sure. It never felt good for me, and especially as I got older, because this was quite some time ago. This was in my 20s. Um, as I got older and understanding what it is to be a man, and one of those things is protecting your child, and so it's a level of regret that um, I still have a bit of. I'm still working through. And I wish I said something,
Yeah.
you know.
I wish there was more of a discussion around the male responsibility in this. It's like I always hear about the woman and the woman and the woman, and it's the woman's right, or it's the woman's like that she all it's always centered around the woman. And I'm like, well, it takes two to make a baby. Men, I feel their responsibility to other men is to be saying things like what you're saying, taking responsibility for creating the child. In your case, you're saying protecting the child, but also just, if you like, men can not create a child too. It's not just
Right.
all on the woman.
Right. I
And
actually
so,
started thinking about that more. Like it puts so much onto the woman
yeah,
that it's kind of unfair
it's very
to her.
unfair
Yeah.
because you're saying basically, oh, like, it's because you're looking only at the outcome. No one's ever, educating a man, and women have to deal with those consequences on a very physical. They're obviously the ones who are going to pay the price, the heavier price. If they have the baby, if they don't, it all is hard on your body, no matter which choice you make. And you pay that price physically. Men might pay it monetarily if there is a baby, but there should be more discussion of like, you can prevent even being in this situation if you are responsible, you know like, you can be responsible for this too. And I never hear
Yeah.
that discussion. It just like is a very strange aspect of this discussion that I feel is not. There should be more men saying, "Yo, dude, like, we also play a part in making these babies, and we should probably not."
Yeah, I mean, there needs I've talked about this publicly, and I've had people reach out to me telling me about support groups for men who are struggling with it.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, and I mean, there are guys who did not want it to happen at all, and it happened,
Yeah.
and they have to deal with it. So these men exist out there. The problem is that it only works to get rid of our voice if we reduce the impact of men in families.
Right.
If we reduce their role to just being these pay pigs, who just give money and everybody just spends it, and you just go out there and make some more. That's how it becomes successful. We just become these male figures who just lay sperm and lay down some dollars, and that's basically it. And I think that's the only way we can have what we have today is by saying that men are optional. Um, and so they're optional in decision making, they're optional in emotions. Oh, and that's the other thing. We barely care about our kids too. I mean, kids are annoying, and the women are supposed to stay home and take care of them. They're the ones who emotionally care about their children, right? And when a guy takes off his shirt and puts his newborn against his chest, he's a creep,
Yeah.
right? That's the type of uh, stuff that we're dealing with today. Being close to our children as a man is weird,
Where are
right?
you dealing with that from?
Well, you especially see it in the online space.
Yeah. It's weird
Like,
because from my perspective, like, every man I know younger that in my generation is way more involved with their kids and present and like a co-parent than my parents' generation, where the dad went to the work, and some moms worked, but it was the mom that was kind of running the kids and the household and whatnot. And
yeah,
I know so many dads now who do the cooking and the laundry, and yeah, I think that there's a lot of science too that shows it used to be like, oh, only the baby can bond with the mom, but now they've found that a child can bond just as strongly as with a mother as with anyone who's just in their life, constantly looking them in the eye, loving them and bonding with them. It's not just the mom that gets to have that kind of oxytocin with a kid.
no, absolutely. I'll say this. I actually just recently wrote an article about it. It should be coming out soon. But when my son was born, um, I mean, she was, I guess, my girlfriend at the time. Well, I don't know. We were rocky at the time. But my son's mother, um, she went back to work. I was working overnights. She was working during the day. and we didn't have a lot of money for babysitting. And on top of that, she didn't want to have a babysitter, right?
This is me and
So
my husband right now. You're describing my life.
so I would work till 6 in the morning, leave work, go to her house, pick up my son, and watch him basically till 6 p.m. and drop him off. By the time I get home and maybe fall asleep, it would be about 7 p.m. And I would wake up around 10 and and start all over again.
Wow,
And I
that's
was doing
nuts.
that every day. And while I was exhausted, it is still some of the best moments. It was the best time
Yeah,
because I got to raise my son
yeah,
and like feeding him, changing his diaper, tickling him, making him
yep,
laugh. Him and his little push toy, when they're learning to walk
yep,
and just run around the house. Um, I would take a nap when he took a nap most of the time. Like that is still some of the um, best times for me. And actually, when that stopped, like I missed it a lot. So this idea that guys can't, we don't care about that stuff, or nothing would happen. It's like, no, like that. I enjoyed it. It wasn't a burden, even though I was like extremely sleep deprived. Like
yeah,
I would take days off just to sleep.
yeah.
Like I was so tired,
Oh, I can't
but
imagine.
I was absolutely in love with my son. I love hanging out with my son, and I think that really helped. Our closeness to this day. My son looks up to me, really respects me. My son rarely, throughout his entire life so far, has rarely given me problems.
Yeah. I think
And
it
it's
shows in
because,
their security too.
yeah, yeah. Like I grew up without my father, so starting off, I didn't know what it meant to be a father. All
Mhm.
I know is one, don't be my father, which means
Yeah,
be involved in his life. So, and then just be the father that I always thought I wanted. And I always thought like I could have a father who was emotionally available,
yep,
who's willing to talk about stuff. And then, especially as I got older and my son got older, I was like, yeah, it's cute, when he's young, but I can't wait till he becomes a teenager so I can give him tips. I can have him avoid the stuff that I went through. And that's exactly what I was able to do. And we could have these conversations, especially during the pandemic. My son is scared a little bit. He's a little bit scared, right? He doesn't want to feel scared, like he's trying to regulate his emotions. And so he's like, let me go to my father because he's a reasonable person. And he's like, Dad, should I be worried about this? And we talked about it. So my son isn't living in fear like everybody else around him.
yeah,
Like that's how important this type of stuff is. And what if I wasn't there? That's
yeah,
that's the most important part about it. And the one thing I wanted to say is, I dedicated my book to my son, and my son read the book, and he admitted to me that he cried because he realized how much that he has that I didn't have,
mm,
and he didn't know about certain things, um, in such a way until he read it within the book. So it's one thing to say like, oh, I didn't grow up with my father, but to hear how it impacted me in a very in-depth way within the book, for my son to see that and appreciate what he has when so many people are unappreciative of all the blessings that they have. Like, to me, that's a gift.
yeah, that's amazing. How do you see things going for conservatives as like as a woman, I'm like the right has a woman problem. They just are
Yes.
not good at they just it's frustrating to me because I think that there's a lot of people who are really up for grabs, but it's like, can someone anywhere just be normal? Can we just be normal? But as how do you feel about it d- from a how do conservatives do reaching out to the Black community?
Oh, they don't.
Yeah, they're not good at it from
I
my
mean, I
perspective.
I I get into this I get into this argument sometimes, and I choose just not to even get into it most of the time. But I've been able to say it like on TV. right? When people try to say, oh, the Democrats, they misabuse, they abuse black people and they don't treat them right. And I say, yeah, but where are the where are the Republicans?
Yeah.
Like, I can go from city to city to city across this country, and I can say that there are no Republicans who are running in there. And this is not a new phenomenon. You
Hmm.
know, I've done I put some of it in the book, but I've done the research. Chicago hasn't had a Republican mayor. I know that they de facto don't have parties in Chicago, but Chicago hasn't had a Republican mayor since the early 1900s. New Orleans hasn't had a Republican mayor since the 1800s.
Right.
Like, it's not much better in most of the cities around the country. As a
Hmm.
matter of fact, New York City is probably one of the few exceptions. Everybody thinks it kind of is a commie hellhole now, but it wasn't that long ago that Rudy Giuliani was in there,
Right.
and Bloomberg, who basically switched to every party known to man.
Yeah.
Uh, he was in there, so it's not completely impossible in New York. But you have just all these different cities. Like, Republicans aren't to be found, and it's not just that. I know, like, because like, when you start doing this, you talk to all types of people who are behind the scenes. Republicans avoid the cities,
Right.
and as an IT guy who's kind of analytical, I think to myself, every 4 years, you have Pennsylvania, for example. The votes come in, this county, red, 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 red. And then what happens? Philadelphia, Pittsburgh.
Right.
You
Yeah.
lose the state. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, at what point are you going to say, okay, maybe we should attempt to go within these cities? And I understand, like, there's the financial aspect. Donors don't want to give money to stuff that they would lose and all this other stuff. Whatever reasons, but it's still the end result. You're not going to win. And the reason why I'm, like, talking about cities is that 60% of Black Americans live in 10 states. We can name these states based off of the major cities. And that's where they primarily live. They live within the cities or in the surrounding urban areas. So if Republicans aren't there locally, it's unreasonable to see them just say, "Oh, I'm going to vote for a Republican, president
Right.
and a Republican senator for the state." Like, why would they do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Most people vote down ballot. Like, that's not crazy to conceive. So, how are they doing as far as reaching out to Black Americans? It may not even be necessarily purposefully. Like, we're not going to reach out to Black Americans. Let's say that's not even the case. They don't even attempt to get their vote locally.
Right.
That's the minimum that you could possibly do. Knock on their doors. I've talked to Republican candidates in New Jersey uh, who happens to be Black. And he went into certain areas in New Jersey and they were like, "You're the first Republican I've ever met."
Wow.
Like, this is the
Ever.
reality. Ever.
Right.
And so they don't know Republicans.
Right.
So there's a disconnect between the online world, which thinks that every Black American either wholeheartedly supports Black Lives Matter and is some communist leftist, or they're so in love with Democrats they would never choose a Republican, right? All
Right.
because they're in this echo chamber of nihilism to say that we could never get Black people, we could never win these cities, we could never. It's always we could never,
Right.
and it's never with the perception of we can or we will do this to. Like, when I was a Democrat, it was always we're going to do this.
Yeah.
It wasn't we can't. Like, it was a completely different mentality, and I've tried to talk about this industry of nihilism that exists for conservatives that reaffirms that it's impossible. It's always
Right.
something that is much bigger than them. They have, like, this chronic underdog syndrome
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
it's like they hope to win and expect to lose on
Right.
just about everything. So when Trump won, it's not like I knew he'd win. It's like, oh my God, we did it. Like, it's a completely different mentality. So, that's the biggest thing that is holding back a lot of conservatives. They have a line of excuses because they don't expect to win anything. They always have some bigger force, like the deep state, that is holding
Globalism.
them back. The globalism, right? And there's aspects of these things that are true. We could talk about the
Definitely.
FBI, right? But it's overblown to the point where they just are disabled. They say, well, if this person loses again, it must have been because of this. And just that, It couldn't have been that no one was knocking on doors, no one attempted to do this, no one attempted to do that. Like there are a whole bunch of things that could happen in an election. And I stand by this. If you're telling me that the only reason that Donald Trump didn't win Georgia was because of Fulton County, which is basically Atlanta, in the same breath you say black people will never vote for a Republican. So which one is it? Was it stolen because of Fulton County, the
Right.
blackest fucking place in the country,
Right.
who would never vote Republican at first? Like, which one is it?
Right.
So it's that kind of like, they don't even make the next logical step to find a way where they could win.
Yeah, they're like
Yeah,
prisoners who escape and don't have a plan. Like the
right.
the prisoners who get caught when they escape and because they didn't think they'd actually get out and get away with it. That's how I feel
Right.
about the Republican Party. They're always like, "What do I do with this freedom?" Like that whenever they win. Even recently, I think like post 2020, there seemed to be like a culture shift where it felt like they could have really capitalized on um the culture war. They felt like they had a little bit of the upper hand. And then
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened in the past 2 years, but I'm like, "And we're back to you guys being lame and somehow alienating everyone." Like you again reminding me of the Republicans I grew up with in the 80s. It's just like, and we're back to you guys, that I think they've had to they've retreated back to like the comfortable moralizing position, and now it's just two parties who are holier than thou and lots of people in the middle going, "I want to leave everyone behind."
Yeah. And I can actually kind of explain why you're seeing what you're seeing. So, behind the scenes, there's a power struggle, especially after Trump lost. Um, there are positives and negatives about Trump. But the one positive thing that you could say about Trump is that Trump turned the Republican Party into a big tent party,
Mhm.
right? He's like, everybody, anybody, I don't care who you screw, what you look like, come and join us,
Right.
right? That was basically his message. What do you have to lose? And that is a message that overshadowed the strong evangelical moralizing position that used to stand firm and have a lot of power within the Republican Party
Right.
before. And so Trump loses this past election, and then you start seeing other candidates jumping in. Well, the only reason other candidates would jump in is because, well, the donors are available, and there are enough donors who are interested in an alternative to Trump,
Mhm.
right? So there's a fractioning. You sort of see it online in like the commentary space, but I'm talking about from behind the scenes in the committees, behind the scenes with donors, right? The donors are like, listen, Trump is a little bit too much. We appreciate him, but we want to move on. And then there are some who are like, I'm Trump 100% forever for life. So there are there's a power grab that's basically happening, and there's a moralizing Republican base that wants to return because they had a lot of power before. And so that's why you're seeing all these weird narratives, all these weird outrage things that are coming up that are just like overstepping that you didn't hear prior. You didn't hear basically since like 2015 or so. Um,
But isn't it pretty much assured that all the money's gonna flow to Trump? I mean, isn't it like isn't it isn't he the candidate?
yes, but
Hasn't that been determined?
yes, but always look at the end.
Right,
So the past election, I think Biden raised over $1 billion. Let's just say, I think it was about $1 billion or near $1 billion. Trump raised, I want to say it was like 700 million, something of that nature. Trump has all these legal things that are going on. Like there's a lot of things that are hitting Trump hard. And I don't know if there are that many enthusiastic donors, big or small, who are giving to Trump in the
right.
same way that they would have in previous elections.
Mhm.
So there are a number of them who are souring on Trump. There are a number of them who sort of want Trump to win, but sort of would be okay if he disappeared.
Mhm.
So there is a fracturing that's happening behind the scenes. But I'll say this, like, especially if Trump loses this next election, uh, you're going to see a whole lot of chaos happen in the Republican Party, because that'll be it.
Mm.
No one, like, listen, you lost two presidential elections, which means that there were two opportunities a Republican could have taken office and didn't. Like, that's how they're going to see it. We're not going to give you more money for a third time to blow it. So, and plus he'll be just way too old, in my opinion. So this is basically it. You're going to see a power struggle, especially after 2024, and I think you're seeing the beginning of it right now.
Yeah, I feel that way about it's interesting. I feel that way about the left too. There's a big fracturing in the left around like Palestine and Israel, and there's a big pushback against Biden. He's losing support. It's like it just feels like everyone's losing support for everything.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's a weird time. Where do you feel your so now you're doing this full time, right? Just the commenting and all of it. Is
For the
that your
most part,
job?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have 8 jobs now.
Yeah. That's what happens. And so what's your kind of sense moving into the election, just because in a weird way, like you said, Trump does open the tent and he has increased support from Latinos, the Black community. The dudes love him often.
I see 2024 as a pivotal point, regardless if Trump wins or loses.
Mhm.
Even if he wins, like, not enough people talk about this. He only has 4 years.
Yeah.
That's it. So the reason why the reason why being president and having 8 years in a row is an advantage is because you get to make all types of wheeling and dealings that lead into the future. Um, but if you only have 4 years, that makes you a lame duck president, and so you don't have that much strength
Yeah.
because you don't have that much time. And so all the things that you probably could have done by working with the Senate and working with Congress and coming up with some landmark, whatever, it's not really going to be there in the same way that you would have if you had 8 straight years. So him coming back into office for 4 years, I don't think, even if he does win, I don't think he will have that much of an impact, other than kind of similar to what he did before, is just signing a bunch of executive orders, which will just get overturned the next time a Democrat comes into office.
Mhm.
So that's the reality of the situation. Um, it's not a good situation legislatively for Trump, even if he wins.
Mhm.
So I think we're going to see, much like we're starting to see, we're seeing a power grab happening behind the scenes with the Republican Party. I see the fracturing, but also the waking up on the left, from moderate Democrats, my former crew, who are finally saying, "Yeah, I'm a liberal, but I am not that."
Yeah.
Um, who there are a number of Democrats who are not for this mutilating of children.
Yep.
Why are you advocating for this stuff? That stuff is weird, right?
Yep.
As a former liberal, I would have never said this was good.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you think
right?
they could
What?
hold their nose and vote for Trump though, or do you think they'll snap back to that factory setting and vote Biden just because, as they can't bear to be a Trump supporter? Or will they do like RFK Jr. or something crazy like that?
No, actually, there's another option. They sit on their hands. Like,
Yeah.
that's
You think
that's the
that's
biggest thing. Yeah, there are so many people who are like, I don't like either option. People who uh, eat, sleep, and drink politics think that's the most blasphemous thing that you could possibly do, but it is the most realistic thing that will happen. People will say, we get another Biden or Trump. You know what? I want none of it. I don't even care.
I
I'm
don't
gonna
even
stay at
care.
home. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Even from people who might vote every so often, they'll just be like, I'm gonna sit on my hands.
Yeah.
Most of the country does not vote. And you
Yeah.
give them two bad options in their viewpoint, right? I'm not supporting either of them. So I'm just going to, it doesn't even matter. I'm just going to
Yeah.
stay at home. That's actually the more likely option. So I'd be curious at the end of the election to see how many less people vote in comparison to the previous election.
Unless they can get the, like, ever threatening to come out and vote young people.
One day they'll do it. No, I mean, honestly, I try to look at what's more likely and what do most regular people do.
Yeah.
And I try not to get stuck in this bubble. Like what ends up happening is, and you see it, like one day Biden says this, that's it. No one's ever voting for Biden ever again.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, 99% of people will never hear about it, nor would they ever care to
Yeah.
know about it, right? It's a nothing situation. So it's kind of like figuring out between the two. The stuff that we see online is something, but how much of something is it?
Right.
And in measuring it against, like, I try to ask myself, would my mom care?
Right.
Would my mom even know about this? And that's like that's the go outside and touch grass of
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's so cool. I could talk to you forever. I just have so many questions, but um I think we just need to have you back on the podcast. And I want to do like a panel with normie, sane people going into the, occasionally going into the election, or do like a live stream with a bunch of people like you and Wilford, and like people that I feel are not insane, and
Yeah,
at certain points going forward, talking about where the reality is versus the online, because I agree with you. There is the online world that we inhabit, which is influential for sure, but how representative is it? It's generally not very representative at all. Like, even when I do stand up, I can always tell who's very online from certain jokes that I do, where it's like, you would only get this if you were very online. And it is a small fraction of the audience usually. Most
yeah,
people aren't online like we are. It distorts our perception of reality. And
yeah,
I was very much like schooled in that, even in 2020, because I thought for sure Trump would win. I thought there would be a massive red wave after in 2022. And I've just been wrong all along, but it's because my perception is so distorted by my audience, what I'm seeing online, and it's not reality at all.
yeah. It's a tough thing to measure, but it's always good to be wrong every so often because it snaps you back.
I'm wrong all the
Uh,
time. Like, I basically got to the point where I was so right about Trump. I knew he was going to win. 2020 he didn't. We're kind of like, I believe he didn't win, but there were forces that, you know, I think I kind of fall in the, like, I don't think the election was stolen, but I do think that there were things that happened before the election that were definitely unfair. Is like the whole Hunter Biden laptop being suppressed. Like, that was crazy. That shit's crazy. And it probably did affect things more than we might know. But I'm not like, oh, storming the Capitol or anything. And
right.
then so yeah, I don't I was wrong about that. I thought there'd be a massive red wave pushing back against like all of the overreach of COVID, and then it was I underestimated Roe v. Wade being overturned, and I also underestimated how many people kind of agreed with a lot of the restrictions and were happy to comply. So that was tainted by my own viewpoint on things as well. So I've just decided that if I think whatever I think, like, I think Biden's probably going to win, so maybe that means Trump's going to win.
I personally think that Biden is likely to win unless something very catastrophic happens
Like,
to the economy.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
'Cause
It's so
everything is
weird.
about economics when it comes to politics. If you
Yeah.
want to know who's going to win or lose, if COVID never happened, Trump would have won in a landslide,
Who does
without a doubt.
Vegas think is going to win?
Oh, that's the question.
They're usually right.
Honestly, I don't know.
We should look into it.
We should.
What is your biggest defect of character?
Um, I don't take compliments well.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if that's one of those things. It's like I'm a perfectionist. Like
Like
it's
I
like
care too much.
I care too much, but like I have a hard time taking compliments, so I just kind of like move past it. Um, and like sometimes, like even with my wife, she's like, "Adam, you're so great." I'm like, all right, that's enough. Like I just kind of keep it moving. Um, I don't know why, but I'm just like that. So I guess my that's my defect that I can come up with real quick.
What's your biggest asset?
Uh, I'm analytical.
Mm.
So for me, like even when I talk about politics, I talk about it in a very non-personal way. Most often, like if you're asking me like who's going to win, I could just talk about it. Like if you ask me who's going to win the World Series, like it's to me it's about figuring out the issue and analyzing it and coming up with a final answer. So I can analyze all types of stuff. If you give me good data, I can analyze it.
Yeah.
And that's why when I said before I'm a consumer. Like I consume everything. I
Yeah.
consume all types of content because I'm trying to analyze. I can discard bad information, bad rhetoric, bad this, and then like take in all the good stuff. That's useful. Okay. And so I'm very analytical in that particular way. I just go straight to the point and pull out what I need to pull out.
Yeah, that's good. You can kind of cut through all the fat that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I think there's so much more to talk about. Do you feel like one of my final questions is do you feel like the victimhood as you kind of, your byline in this book or the subtitle is identifying the ideologies, behavioral patterns and cultural norms that encourage a victimhood complex and you're more I think I see this all over in our society, but this is more
Yes.
specific to the Black community. Do you think it's getting better, worse? How do you feel about things?
It's hard
Same?
to measure. It's
Yeah.
hard to measure. I see victimhood all around me too.
Mhm.
I feel like the sixth sense. I see dead people. Like I see victimhood everywhere,
Everywhere.
uh,
Yeah.
and I see it on the left. I see it on the right.
Yep.
And what's very interesting to me, and I don't want this to be like I'm picking on the right or the left. And like I said, this is not an emotional thing for me, but it's when I have these discussions about victimhood, and we can I'll see people who say this is victimhood, right? And they can see it on the left,
Yeah.
clear as day, but they can look at their site and they cannot see it whatsoever.
I
Not even
know.
that they're not trying to, they just cannot see it. And I'll be like, you guys are literally using the same
The
language.
same language. Yep.
And I'm just like, it's dumbfounding, but it's fascinating at the same time. So
Mhm.
there's victimhood narratives that are happening all over the place. Both political parties use it. Um, there are ideologies that exist all over the place that employ victimhood type of narratives to disempower people and make them wait for a savior. And if only, it kind of reminds me when someone was like, when Michael Knowles was saying, so when should men get married? When the laws change. When would that ever happen? So you have
Right.
to wait till somebody else does this particular thing before you start living your life and doing the thing that you actually want to do. It's like, no, like that's a victim type of mentality.
Right.
Someone who actually wants something figures out the best way that they can move forward and actually grab it. So I just
That's
see
the
so
whole
much
way I see
victimology.
conservatives with like reaching outreach to Latinos, the Black community, all of it. I do think who actually are usually more socially conservative.
Yeah,
These are people who would probably be more in alignment with the values of the party and they just have that like, well, we don't stand a chance. I'm like that's such a like loser mentality that you're start from that starting point and I don't know. It just seems ingrained in everybody. Although,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very strange. It's like a very strange time.
And there's an industry that's built upon it.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want you to think differently. Like,
Right.
it's happening all that's what I'm trying to tell people. Like, it's happening all around you. The
Yeah.
Republican Party does it, Democrats do it. They find certain ways to make you a victim. While the left is worried about white supremacy everywhere, the right is worried about the deep state and can't tell you what the deep state actually means,
Mhm.
and just wants to abolish everything that has initials and is part of the government. Like that, like that won't change anything, right? If
Yeah.
the FBI disbands, it won't make your life better, right?
Yeah.
So that's not the reason why your life isn't fulfilling or anything like that.
Mm.
So like you have to go go past the jargon, because the whole point is to make you stuck, make you dependent on someone else. And so if you're not doing something, if you're waiting for the Republican Party to make your life better, then guess what? They're your saviors.
Yeah.
And what's even more fascinating for me from a Christian standpoint, and the Republican Party wants to take on, we're the party of Christians, is that I see them waiting for a savior, quite literally, in Donald Trump to fix
Yeah.
anything and everything. Yes, life will get so much better once Trump gets into office, and it won't,
Yeah.
because no politician will ever fix all of your problems, and that's they just don't see that.
Mhm.
And I really, really wish they would, especially the savior aspect, when they're holding this man up in such high esteem, whether it was Trump or somebody else. He is not Jesus, even though he's out here selling Bibles and everything. But like, he is not Jesus. He is not here to save you, right? He's here to be a politician,
Yeah.
and he's going to use you in your emotions, in your doubt that everything is crumbling around us. And the only way to keep it from doing that is by putting him in power.
Right.
Like, this is victim savior dynamic, like to a T.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, well.
We said a lot.
No, it's so good. I think you're just such an important voice in the space, and I find you refreshing and hopeful, and I think your perspective is really important because it is coming from more of a place of, I think if you center around, like, it's why we started this podcast, because I saw victimhood, but then everybody was just talking about being a victim, and victim, it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy and cycle and conversation. And I'm like, okay, but how do we inspire people to take responsibility for their own life and what they can take responsibility for, because these politicians can manipulate our emotions very easily, but it's not really going to have very much bearing. It will have some bearing depending on how much you
Mhm.
let in or let out and pay attention to it, but it's not like your life will be affected more or less. I think the border thing is very pressing and very that's like affecting a lot of people all over the country, and the gender stuff I think is very, very pressing. But like, I'm a middle class person. I don't have money in the stock market. Whoever is president, it's going to be more like the social stuff that affects me. It's certainly not going to be like, I'm pissed off about the independent contractor rule. That's Biden. I'm pissed off about FinCEN and like all of their shit that they're trying to get small businesses to do. That's the Biden administration. So I'm looking at it practically like anything that's going to minimize that, those are problems that are actually affecting me. And I think most Americans look at it's like, I think Bill Burr said it a long time ago. He was like, everyone's a selfish voter in this country. It all just depends on like, what are your things? What do you care about? For young liberal women, it's Roe v. Wade. It's like
Mhm.
everyone's voting with their own issues and wallet. So, and I don't
Yeah.
begrudge them that.
The number one thing is economics. If
Yeah.
the economy was booming under Biden, Biden could stay in office for another 4 years. It always comes down to the economy. And like that's a tried and true type of thing to bring up.
Yeah.
But yet, especially with the culture wars of the past, I don't know, 8 plus years, we think that the culture is the number one driving force for voting, and it's
Right.
not.
It's not.
Um, it always comes down to I met people who hated Trump, but prior to COVID, they were like, "Man, everything is booming. I'm voting for Trump." Like
Yeah.
they didn't care because money rules. And if Trump being in office represents that the economy is doing good, well, keep this man in office as long as possible.
Yeah.
Like that's all they cared about. The
Yeah.
mean tweets didn't matter. Him allegedly saying this and saying
Yeah.
that, none of that stuff mattered anymore because their pockets were doing right. But when it wasn't, they were open for him to go because it falls on his shoulders again.
Yeah.
But the one thing I wanted to say is, and I think this is how the Republican Party can win on many things. They have to tell more stories. They have to remember that people are emotional and they respond to stories. If you look at all the changes that have happened for the Democratic Party, like all these wild and crazy things that have happened, like how did that happen? What do? They bring children into these chambers and have these children tell stories
Yeah.
and tug at the hearts. They always have stories. We watch our country burn and go all types of craziness and all this new legislation. Why? Because they told the story of George Floyd.
Right.
And they had one story that changed our country. Like that is what they need. So like when you look at Chloe Cole, who's a detransitioner, her
Yeah.
story, she's all over the country telling her story and getting things done because telling stories always works. The
I met
left understands that.
Yeah, they do. I met a detransitioner. I think Riley Gaines too is doing that. Like I met a
Yeah,
detransitioner was it last night? God, it's been so no, 2 nights ago. And a couple of them actually. And their stories are make me want to they're enraging. Like what these poor kids have gone through, it makes my blood boil because it's so um we've abdicated our role as adults and allowed these children to make decisions that they should not have been making, and all of these authorities are behind it, and the medical it's all so bonkers, but you see just
yeah,
how it makes me crazy. But they have to, and then they're put in this position where they've got to tell these stories to even save another generation of children from going down the same path. And
yeah,
they're fragile, they've been through a lot. It's like it makes me very mad. That's something that's a hill I'll die on. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, you just have to know what hills you'll die on because it's a very confusing time. Very. And for me, it's like free speech, don't let, like, boys and girls are different. Let's not push all this weirdness on them and let them do things that are irreversible when they're too young to make these decisions and steal the openness of their future, the ability for them to have an open path in their life and make these decisions.
right.
And free speech. Like it's pretty simple for me, but that that yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty simple as well. Um, I don't my expectation is just some normalcy.
Normalcy. I don't know what
Just some
that looks like
normalcy.
anymore.
All right, I'll tell you what normalcy means to me. Normalcy means that things are relatively predictable, and we talk about policy again because I feel like we don't talk about policy. Like
Yeah.
there is a bill that we're trying to work on. Here's what's in the bill. Here's why it's important. Let's discuss the merits of it.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of thing. Like
Mhm.
old school politics. That's stuff that we used to do. But now it's about the mean words that someone says or doesn't say. Biden tripped down the stairs. Like it's all this other like arbitrary stuff, and we'll go on and on for days about stuff that doesn't matter, doesn't
Yeah.
help anybody. Like it's just one big distraction, and it doesn't provide any sort of benefit for the American people outside of just becoming another episode of Jerry Springer.
Yeah.
Like this is what we're dealing with. And so to me, I just want some sort of normalcy. I want someone who won't engage in all the nonsense thing of the moment that's happening, because not all presidents did that in the first place. Like, they just, quite literally, they would ignore the media.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I remember when George W. Bush was in office, like, he would just ignore, like, I would watch the news and they would ignore that. Oh, did you hear what such and such said? No,
Yeah.
just move on. Like, he didn't care. And
Yeah.
I was like, man, I missed that. Yes, everybody's going to criticize you. You're the president. Like, just ignore it and move
Mhm.
on to the things that actually matter. And they used to say, I'm here to do a job. Like,
Mhm.
you don't hear that much anymore. So, I like that type of politician, whether it's president or anyone else. You're here to do a job. Like, just do it. You don't need to go on Twitter to become famous. You don't need to get in spats with people who don't freaking matter. Like,
Right.
just do your job,
Do your
please.
job.
That's all.
Do your job. I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time. Where can everybody find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at wrong_speak. But definitely check out my Substack, adambcoleman.substack.com. Those are the two top places that I'm active at. I'm trying to do more articles, video content. Yes, and I meant to obviously bring this up. My series Breaking Bread, you can watch it on YouTube, youtube.com/at wrong_speak. My series Breaking Bread basically is just meeting people in person, having a meal, and talking politics, life, culture, whatever it may
Cool.
be. And so, there's some traveling aspect to it. I've been to London twice with it.
Nice.
Florida. I just did a New England trip.
Oh, is that when
So
you
I'm
saw
trying to.
Warren?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
he
And he
was on
said
the
hello.
show. Yeah, he's great. If
Yeah,
you come through Austin, let me know.
absolutely, absolutely. I've never been to Texas, by the way.
Oh, you would like it.
Yeah, I've never been to Texas,
Well,
so
you're friends with
that's on the
Jesse too. You
list.
could go to Houston and see him.
Yes, I got to figure something out.
Yeah, do it.
um,
Just don't do it in the summer.
oh God, no.
Well, I hope there's not another earthquake over there.
Oh my God, that was so weird. I was in a
So
Zoom
wild.
call and they were like, "Are you having an earthquake?" I'm like, "Am I having an earthquake? What is going on?"
That's
I
crazy.
thought it was like a truck going by, but
Yeah, that's what
it was
Megan
happening
said.
way longer.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
strange.
We're used to that in went back in Cali, but yeah, it's very weird when it happens in a place that you're not used to it or expecting it at all. You're like, whoa, that's unsettling.
Yeah, my dog was confused.
Yeah, I bet. All
Yeah.
right, I'm gonna go put the little one down for a nap. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Walk-ins Welcome is brought to you by Phetasy Productions. We are no longer on a network. We are completely independent. If you love this show and you love what we do, we are asking more now than ever before for you to join us in our community at Phetasy.com. Become a paid supporter and help support the podcast that you love. Being that we are independent means we're taking all of the expenses back, and that means that we need our listeners to support us. If you're also listening and you have a product and you want to advertise with us, please email me at phetasy@gmail.com. We're hoping that we leap and the net will appear. Please become a paid supporter at Phetasy.com and help us stitch our net together. Thank you.
The check-in with Bridget and cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.